From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
What we saw happen today is this is the very first step toward taking the White House in 2012, and you have just sent a message that Barack Obama will be a one-term president.
Michelle Bachmann takes first place in Iowa's straw poll. Ron Paul finishes second. Rick Perry enters the presidential race. Syrian Navy gunboats have shelled the city of Latakia as President Bashar al-Assad broadens his military offensive to crush opposition protests. We'll speak with leading Syrian human rights lawyer Haytham Hala and his son Ayas Mala.
People of Syria have been given very limited access to the internet. For the past years, they did not have access to Facebook, to YouTube, to any of the social media that the rest of the world enjoy.
Then a new report finds one U.S. drone strike occurs every 4 days in Pakistan.
In fact, I can say that the types of operations that the U.S. has been involved in the counterterrorism realm, that nearly for the past year there hasn't been a single collateral death because of the exceptional proficiency, precision of the capabilities that we've been able to develop.
Not a single civilian casualty? That's disputed by Drone Strikes Exposed, the new report by Chris Woods with the Bureau of Investigative Journalism in London. This is Democracy Now! All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Obama kicks off a 3-day Midwestern bus tour aimed at touting his record on the economy. He's faced widespread criticism, in part for focusing on the deficit instead of tackling high unemployment. After his bus tour, Obama will meet with a number of corporate executives at the White House later this week. In his weekly radio address, Obama continued his call for public pressure on Congress to overcome partisan differences.
Over the coming weeks, I'll put forward more proposals to help our businesses hire and create jobs, and I won't stop until every American who wants a job can find one. But we can't let partisan brinksmanship get in our way. The idea that making it through the next election is more important than making things right. That's what's holding us back. The fact that some in Congress would rather see their opponents lose than see America win.
Minnesota Congressmember and Tea Party stalwart Michelle Bachmann has won the first informal contest of the Republican presidential race with a victory in Iowa's straw poll. On Saturday, she thanked supporters for the win.
What we saw happen today is this is the very first step toward taking the White House in 2012, and you have just sent a message that Barack Obama will be a one-term president. This was a wonderful down payment on taking the country back, and it started in Iowa.
The Minnesota Congressmember and presidential candidate Michelle Bachmann received more than 4,800 votes, followed closely by Texas Congressmember Ron Paul. Speaking in Iowa, Paul emphasized his dominant campaign theme of the high costs of war.
Foreign policy has been a big issue in our campaign because the country is tired of the war, and we're all so broke. The wars have been going on for 10 years. They're undeclared. They're fought under international banners, NATO and United Nations, and we don't see an end to it. But it's also costing us a lot of money. We're into wars that are costing us trillions of dollars. Those trillions of dollars should have been left in the economy to build jobs and produce prosperity here at home.
Former Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty placed a distant third, and on Sunday he announced his departure from the presidential race. As Pawlenty exits the contest, Texas Governor Rick Perry has formally announced his candidacy. On Saturday, he kicked off his campaign in Charleston, South Carolina.
I came to South Carolina because I will not sit back and accept the path that America is on, because a great country requires a better direction, because a renewed nation needs a new president. It is time to get America working again, and that's why, with the support of my family and unwavering belief in the goodness of America, I declare to you today as a candidate for President of the United States.
For more on the Republican presidential race, we'll speak with Sarah Posner of Religion Dispatches after headlines. Relief efforts are said to be improving in the drought-stricken Horn of Africa, but international funding continues to fall short. The head of UN Humanitarian Assistance, Catherine Bragg, says the UN remains more than $560 million short on aid for Somalia and more than $1 billion short region-wide. On a visit to refugee camps in Kenya, UN Emergency Relief Coordinator Valerie Amos said aid is reaching more people in need.
We are making some progress in terms of being able to scale up our operations. It is clear that we need to do much more in terms of being able to provide facilities, support, supplies within Somalia itself. That means, of course, encouraging colleagues who are working on the political side of things to try and make that progress even faster, but also our negotiations to get additional support into Al-Shabaab-controlled territory must continue.
Some 12 million people face starvation in the Horn of Africa, with 250 children dying in Somalia each day. At a refugee camp in Ethiopia, a physician with Doctors Without Borders said many children are receiving medical treatment too late to save their lives.
They're a very, very vulnerable population, and the mortality rate amongst the malnourished children is very high, and especially in these conditions in which the children are coming with very, very severe complications and very, very late sometimes. So the care that we can provide sometimes is too late for us to be able to save everyone's life.
In Iraq, at least 56 people have been killed in a series of nationwide attacks. Blasts were reported in the northern city of Kirkuk, the capital city of Baghdad, and the southern Shiite cities of Najaf, Kut, and Karbala. Attackers used a combination of parked car bombs and roadside bombs, and in one case, a suicide bomber rammed a vehicle into a police station. The attacks marked the first major act of violence since Iraqi officials announced they would begin negotiations over whether to keep U.S. forces in Iraq beyond scheduled withdrawal date of December 31st. The Syrian government has launched a combined assault on the port city of Latakia, killing at least 25 people. For the first time, forces loyal to President Bashar al-Assad used Navy vessels alongside tanks and soldiers in the ongoing crackdown against opposition protests. Witnesses say government forces cut off landline telephones and internet connections and fired at civilian buildings. Latakia has seen large anti-government protests since the Syrian uprising began in mid-March. The violence follows massive demonstrations Friday in which tens of thousands of people turned out to protest the Assad regime. Syrian government forces killed at least 17 people, and Washington Secretary of State Hillary Clinton called for increased international pressure on Assad's government.
We urge those countries still buying Syrian oil and gas, those countries still sending Assad weapons, those countries whose political and economic support give him comfort in his brutality, to get on the right side of history. President Assad has lost the legitimacy to lead, and it is clear that Syria would be better off without him.
Opposition fighters in Libya have launched an offensive near the Tunisia border in an effort to cut supplies to Colonel Muammar Gaddafi's military forces. They have taken hold of the western town of Azazouia, but claim to have suffered many casualties from pro-Gaddafi forces. Meanwhile, in the east, opposition forces continue to assault the strategic oil city of Brega, where Gaddafi's fighters control important oil facilities. Gaddafi regime spokesperson Musa Ibrahim vowed a prolonged fight.
We are very powerful. The tens of thousands and tens of thousands of volunteers are armed right now. It doesn't matter whether NATO advances or not, whether the rebels advance or not, because we will always be able to fight in a year's time, in 2 years, in 3 years.
Former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak is back in court today for the second session of his trial for corruption and the killing of protesters during the revolution that ended his rule. Clashes have erupted outside the courtroom between opponents and supporters of the Mubarak regime. The hearing could decide if the current head of the ruling Egyptian Military Council, Mohammed Hussein Tantawi, will testify at Mubarak's trial. Tantawi served as Mubarak's defense minister for 2 decades. Mubarak's return to court comes as one of the most well-known activists in the revolution that ousted him has been charged. Asma Mahfouz appeared in a Cairo courtroom Sunday to face allegations of inciting violence against Egypt's armed forces. Mahfouz was arrested for comments she made on the social networking site Facebook. She's well known in Egypt as one of the founders of the April 6th youth movement and for a widely circulated web video urging fellow citizens to join the protests in Tahrir Square. The British government has tapped a former U.S. police chief to consult on gang violence following the wave of unrest that swept Britain last week. William Bratton, former police chief of New York, Los Angeles, and Boston, now chairs a Manhattan-based private security firm. Bratton is known for his so-called broken window strategy of policing, which stretches increased arrests for lower-level infractions in order to send the message that no crime will be tolerated. On Friday, he announced he'd accepted the consulting offer directly from British Prime Minister David Cameron.
This morning I had a conversation with Prime Minister Cameron in which he thanked me for my agreeing to work with the British government as they deal with the issues of gang crime, gang violence, and gang intervention. And I'm looking forward to the opportunity to work with them on those issues. My assignment is to focus more on the issues of the American experience dealing with gangs and what we may be able to share with them that might help them to prevent similar activities in the future.
Burma's pro-democracy leader Aung San Suu Kyi has made her first political trip outside the main city of Rangoon since her latest 7-year house arrest ended in November. Suu Kyi met with supporters in 2 towns Sunday, defying warnings from the military junta the trip would spark riots. Suu Kyi has spent 15 of the last 22 years in detention. The Norwegian man arrested for the attacks that left 77 people dead last month returned to the scene of the mass slaughter Saturday, accompanied by police. Wearing a bulletproof vest and a leash, Anders Breivik guided investigators around Utoya Island for 8 hours, simulating the killing of his 69 victims. Breivik has admitted to plotting and carrying out the attack, as well as the bombing of a building in Oslo that killed another 8 people. And back in the United States, more than a dozen trade unions tied to the AFL-CIO have announced a boycott of next year's Democratic National Convention in Charlotte. In a statement, the unions, representing some 2.5 million workers in building and construction, say they'll skip the convention in protest of labor policies in the gathering's host state of North Carolina, and also of Democrats' record on the economy. Labor leader Mark Ayers wrote, quote, "We find it troubling that the party so closely associated with basic human rights would choose a state with the lowest unionization rate in the country." And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy